All right, folks should be able to see my screen. It's a PowerPoint presentation. And I'm just going to pause here for just a second. There was some conversation in the chat about folks not being able to access the PDF version of the slides that was put into the chat. As folks are attending, they're not going to have seen the file document that was uploaded in the chat pod. So we'll load that again here a few more times during this presentation. And I will say also that I am flying solo. I have Mary Stalkey here helping me this afternoon, but our normal captain is not present for this session today, and so we are going to do the best we can. And give me just one more moment and we'll get started here, folks. Okay, so I'm seeing now that folks are able to see the slides as a PDF version. And we'll go ahead and get started. So welcome everyone. My name is Jim Ward. As I mentioned, I'm the Director of Planning. I am working in partnership with Mary Stalkey and the other folks here at THN to carry out the 2022 CoC Program Annual Competitive Application Process. That's what we're here to talk about. If you have questions as we're going through the presentation, please drop them in the chat. We're going to do our best to answer whatever questions you have. There will be, I imagine, plenty of time for questions after I'm done kind of rattling on at y'all for a little while. And yeah, please don't be afraid to use the chat. You can chat either me directly, Mary directly. You can chat everyone if you want everyone to see your question. And Mary will hopefully be able to drop those slides in the file pod or in the chat here again in a few minutes. So I didn't include Mary on this slide, but my name is Jim Ward. Mary is our Director of Engagement, and we're going to be the THN staff persons with you this afternoon. So we wanted to talk about, a few things. One, anytime one of these funding competitions happens, folks that we have not been engaging with year-round find us. They find out about THN. They find out about a continuum of care. So we're going to spend a few minutes talking about what a continuum of care is. We're going to spend a little bit of time talking about the current funding landscape in the balance of state continuum of care. And then we're going to talk about specifically the CoC annual competition process. So that'll start to make a little bit more sense when we get to the second item on the agenda. But there are numerous funding opportunities happening right now. And this session today is about a specific funding opportunity known as the annual CoC program competition. So, for folks that have been around for a while, they probably know and understand what a continuum of care is. And this slide is obviously not going to communicate the entirety of the continuum of care program, the parts of the continuum of care, but it is a really great resource for folks that are new to the continuum of care as a concept or to the continuum of care program. This is what HUD calls their continuum of care roadmap, and it kind of walks through the different components of a continuum of care, from everything from operating a CoC, which is this kind of organizational body of interested stakeholders working to end homelessness in a particular geographic area, all the way to CoC program funding and the eligible uses of that funding. It talks a little bit about the process that we're engaged in now, which is this annual application for funds. But it also talks about what a continuum of care should look like in terms of the governance structure, the board, the committees, the homeless management information system or data collection activities, and other regulatory and statutory requirements of the continuum of care. So there is a link at the bottom of this slide. Folks are welcome to, when we're done here today, you are, we would encourage you, if you're not familiar with the CoC, to revisit, or even if you are familiar, revisit the CoC roadmap and yeah, just there's good information. Every time I watch, I mean, I've been doing this for a long time. Every time I watch it, I learn something new. It's about 20 minutes. It's not too much, but really, really important. So who is Texas Homeless Network and what are we doing here? Why are we relevant in this process? So Texas Homeless Network, first of all, our mission is to lead Texas communities to make homelessness rare, brief, and non-recurring. We do that through three main organizational activities. Those are statewide advocacy and a legislative agenda as it relates to homelessness and ending homelessness in the state of Texas. We do participate in various national initiatives through our advocacy team, which is distinct from our role as the CoC's collaborative applicant or the continuum of care lead agency. And then additionally, we also serve as the HMIS lead agency. HMIS stands for the Homeless Management Information System. It is the required data collection system that we use to satisfy HUD requirements, but also to collect data about people that are receiving services, the efficacy of programs, and overall communicate and understand what's happening with homelessness at a system level. So HMIS is a really important part of what we do, and we do that for a specific part of the state known as the Balance of State Continuum of Care. So the Balance of State Continuum of Care is intended to develop system-level responses and coordinate community strategies that prevent and end homelessness while increasing housing stability. So a continuum of care, as I kind of briefly alluded to, is this. It's got actually 4 definitions. So today we're going to talk about a couple of those, but briefly, a continuum of care is, again, a group of stakeholders organized for the purpose of coordination and collaboration to address and end homelessness at its kind of core. It is also, you may hear the continuum of care, when someone says the CoC or continuum of care, they may be referring to the geographic area associated with a continuum of care. And in most communities, that's, well, I shouldn't say in most communities. In some communities in the state, that's a single county. But for the Texas Balance of State Continuum of Care, it is a significantly larger area. And we'll look at a map of the Balance of State Continuum of Care here in just a moment. Typically, continuums of care are, again, structured at the county level or in a small regional level. But the Balance of State Continuum of Care is on this map. Everything that you see in orange is part of the Texas Balance of State Continuum of Care. So there are 11 CoCs in the state of Texas, and the Texas Balance of State is one of 11. So we are by far the largest. We cover 215 of Texas's 254 counties, and we are responsible as a CoC for various things, to include but not limited to the point in time count, or PIT. You might be familiar with it as the PIT count. It stands for a point in time count. The housing inventory count, or HIC count, which looks at, well, first, the point in time count looks at is a census of people experiencing homelessness in a given geographic area on a single night. HUD requires that single night be in January of the year. And so we will organize local groups to carry out a point in time count in their community. And then we report back all that data, aggregate it to a CoC level point in time count, and then pass that information along to HUD on behalf of the CoC. We do a similar process with the housing inventory count, where we connect with folks operating emergency shelter or transitional housing or rapid rehousing or any other type of housing intervention related specifically to ending homelessness as a primary function, and collect data about those projects and then report that on to HUD. So the CoC itself has a lot of responsibilities. It's seeming more and more like there's not anything that HUD thinks that we don't do. So that's everything from hosting this annual competition for CoC program funding to responding to natural disasters and public health emergencies like COVID-19 and the kind of newly forming monkeypox epidemic. Most CoCs in the state of Texas, or as you can see from the map, are single county CoCs and are centered around metropolitan areas. Those metropolitan areas are places where enough infrastructure exists to support all of the required activities of a CoC. In a smaller community, the requirements are so great that it doesn't always make a lot of sense financially or administratively to have that community as its own CoC, although that's not always the case and hasn't always been the case. The Texas Balance of State has grown over time. At one point, there were 27 CoCs in the state of Texas, and have since merged and joined forces, and the map changes a little bit every so often, but this is how it's looked since 2017, and it doesn't. We're not anticipating any significant changes anytime in the immediate future. Mary, I know that you and your team work a little bit more closely with the governance of the CoC. Is there anything that you would want to say about the governance of the CoC? I'll put you on the spot there.
Just to say a good hello after everyone. I'm Mary Stalky, the Director of Engagement for the Balance of State CoC. Just what this slide shows exactly. There are a number of bodies within our governance structure. We have the general membership, which in the case of our CoC is anybody at all who lives and or works in the CoC. So if you live or work in the CoC, you are considered to be a general member. We have the CoC board, which gets elected every year. Half of them get elected every year, and they represent the general members, and they are the policymaking body that is has the authority to act on behalf of the CoC. We've also got a number of CoC committees that focus on specific aspects of the CoC. And on the local level, we work really closely with local homeless coalitions. Those are groups that are coordinating and planning and delivering and evaluating services and housing and shelter, and also coordinated entry planning entities that oversee coordinated entry. So those are the main governance structures within Balance of State CoC.
Thanks, Mary. And I did notice that there is a question in the Q&A pod. If folks would put their questions in the chat, we will be guaranteed to see it. So if you would put your question in the chat, and either Mary or I will respond to you either in writing or verbally. So I wanted to move us along and talk about like what we're here to talk about today. So 2022 has been an incredible year in the amount of funding that could potentially be available to CoCs. There are two main funding opportunities right now that people are probably aware of on some level, whether they're intimately familiar with them or they've just heard about them and heard about the dollar amount available with them and thought, man, that would be really interesting to explore. So those are, they're listed here on this slide, the Supplemental NOFO to address rural and unsheltered homelessness, which does pretty much exactly what it sounds like in the name, is a large pool of funding that HUD has made available. As of right now, it is a 3-year opportunity. And in the Balance of State, there is approximately $67 million between rural and unsheltered homelessness for those 3 years. We're not going to spend a whole lot of time talking about that opportunity today, although I know that there's probably folks on this call that are really, really interested. We are going to spend some time talking more about the rural and unsheltered homelessness. We will get a link up to a webinar for Monday, the 29th, where we'll talk more about what's eligible under the rural and unsheltered homelessness supplemental NOFO, what the requirements are for applicants, all that good stuff that folks need to know in order to be able to submit an application. But today we're going to talk more about the annual CoC program competition. And I have the title there with an ellipsis because the title of the funding opportunity is actually significantly longer than the FY 2022 annual CoC program competition, but it's largely irrelevant for our CoC because the remainder of the competition doesn't apply to the Texas Balance of State. So both of these funding opportunities, and this part's really, really important, require applications or applicants, project applicants. If you're thinking about, I want to operate a housing project, you are required to submit your application to us and have that application evaluated by the CoC's collaborative applicant. Again, in the Texas Balance of State, that's THN. We use a software platform called Apply. It's a grant application software. Folks can access it by clicking the link in the slide in your PDF version and complete the application in Apply. Now, the applications for the supplemental NOPO are not yet available, but the applications for the annual program competition are available on Apply. So if you click that link, you'll see that it'll take you to a page with 2 active applications. And it's really, really important that you understand where you're going with that. So there's a host of other materials available on our website that point you in the right direction. But just the headline here is we use Apply to evaluate the project applications that are submitted to the Texas Balance of State CoC, and that if you're planning to apply, you're required to submit an application to us. So another thing to note about both of these opportunities is that they both have extremely tight timelines and require a meticulous attention to detail. As you can probably imagine, when you're dealing with federal funding, you want to be sure to cross your T's and dot your I's and then check them 2 or 3 times before you submit them, because errors in the project application can really derail an application or the entire process depending on where the error occurs. So the timelines that we're talking about this year, for context, for the 2022 annual competition, normally HUD will give CoCs about 90 days to complete this process, which entails us soliciting project applications, evaluating them, and then completing an additional part that applicants don't see, which is the CoC application that THN completes on behalf of the Balance of State. And they give us about 90 days to do all that. And it takes every bit of 90 days to do that work. This year, they gave us 60 days to do that. And so we have hopefully developed a process that will provide sufficient flexibility for eligible applicants and give us the time that we need to prepare the materials that go along with the applications, and then cross our T's and dot our I's to make sure that the CoC and the applicants in the CoC have the greatest chance of success. I kind of alluded to it a moment ago, but both of these are part of larger collaborative application processes, right? So your project application is one part of a larger process that HUD calls the collaborative application. And that consists of 3 things, really: your project application and all of the project applications in the CoC, the priority listing of projects that we plan to recommend to HUD on behalf of the CoC, and then this thing called the CoC application, which is where HUD asks us questions about the activities occurring in that 215 county area. What sorts of strategies is the CoC applying? What sorts of relationships exist between, like, public child welfare agencies and workforce development boards and public health departments? So all those sorts of things kind of get rolled into the CoC application, and is a significant portion of the project applicant's score is based on the CoC application. So we're not going to spend a whole lot of time diving into that right now. Just know that it's a really important part of this whole process. And then I think something that's really important this year is that HUD is really prioritizing collaborations with partners. So, how applicants to the annual and the supplemental are able to leverage additional housing and healthcare resources for the benefit of project participants, but also the CoC's ability to recognize and demonstrate project applicants' performance. So we'll talk a little bit more about that here in just a second. So what you need to know for the annual CoC program competition. Right now, there are 2 RFPs and 2 applications available and apply. The RFPs are hosted on our website. And there will be a link a little bit later on in the PowerPoint that will take you directly to the competition application materials. Looks like Mary might be posting stuff in the chat as well. But both of those RFPs, I apologize in advance, have extremely tight timelines. The renewal RFP was released on Wednesday, August 17th, and is due on August the 31st at 11:59 p.m., which I believe is also a Wednesday. And the annual bonus RFP was released on Friday, so last Friday the 19th, and it is also due on August the 31st at 11:59 p.m. So these funds can be used to do 2 things, really. One, you can renew a project that was funded by HUD in FY 2021 under the renewal RFP. And then under the bonus RFP, you can apply for new projects to house DV survivors using DV bonus funds, or we will also accept applications to expand eligible renewal projects using the CoC bonus funding. So that part's really, really important because these applications are limited in scope to those 2 categories, right? So renewals and new, and then within the new, projects specifically to house DV survivors and expansions of eligible renewal projects using CoC bonus funds. So to do all that work, there is approximately $6.4 million available. That is $2.1 million in CoC bonus and $4.2 million in DV bonus, which is actually a little bit less than we've seen in years past. In 2021, the DV bonus was right at about $5 million. I think it was $5 million exactly. And then the CoC bonus was also a little bit higher than that. Some other points of consideration for the annual competition is that most general homeless service organizations will not qualify for the DV bonus. In that HUD made special considerations to agencies whose primary mission is to serve domestic violence survivors. So if you're an organization that serves just anyone that walks through your door, unless you have something in your mission statement or you can demonstrate how you satisfy that requirement that your primary mission is to serve domestic violence survivors, it will be difficult for you to satisfy that requirement. CoC bonus applications, so under the CoC bonus, so that $2.1 million pool of funding can only be submitted by applicants that are eligible for renewal in the annual renewal RFP process. So those are folks that, again, were previously awarded in 2021 and that are eligible for renewal in 2022. You cannot expand a project that was not eligible for renewal in 2022. So there are a handful of CoC renewal projects that, because of timing issues, are not eligible for renewal in 2022. They'll be eligible for renewal in 2023. Those projects would not be eligible to expand because there's technically nothing for them to expand in this application process. If you have questions about that, please feel free to reach out to me directly if that applies to you, or we can talk about it in this space, but it's pretty technical and is not directly applicable to most folks. Additionally, I mentioned before, applications must be submitted to and evaluated by us, THN, and then again, extremely tight timelines are required, unfortunately. Now, the annual renewal RFP process is different than years prior. Again, due to the exceptionally tight timeline and the requirement that we have all of the competitive application process wrapped up by August 31st in the NOFO, we are requiring that all scored materials be submitted to the CoC for review by August 31st, and those components are listed in Appendix B of the annual renewal RFP. There are two notable exceptions to the components of the project application that we wanted to make folks aware of for renewal projects. That is, the certification of consistency with the consolidated plan is due no later than September the 15th. And then the eSNAPS project application is due no later than September the 15th. We wanted to give folks a little bit more time to complete those parts of the project application. They are pretty complicated, at least the eSNAPS project application, but part of the benefit in removing them or divorcing them from the competitive application process is that means that we are available to provide support in their collection and completion. So just, kind of really quickly, the certification of consistency is a form that applicants will collect from their consolidated planning jurisdiction in their community. There's more details in the RFP about who that is in your community. But historically, that form collection has presented some challenges to folks on a normal year when we have a full 90-day window, because quite often that goes through a local governmental approval process, which could include things like going before city council or some other type of review prior to the authorized official signing off on the certification of consistency. And we just didn't feel like it was fair to try to have applicants submit that by August 31st with, a 13-day turnaround. It just doesn't seem reasonable. So that certification of consistency, there's not a whole lot we can do to help y'all with that. We can tell you what you need to do. We can tell you who you need to talk to, but really it's between the applicant and their local consolidated planning jurisdiction, or in some applicants' state instance, the state of Texas, depending on where the project application is located. This stuff will also apply to the bonus RFP, but I do want to just kind of go through this a little bit more for renewal projects and for the renewal applicants on this call for their benefit. Some other things that you need to know going into this process is that if you've used Apply before, there will be sections of the application that auto-populate with FY 2021 information, which will need to be updated. So specifically, things like your entity eligibility verification forms, where you communicate your system for award management number, your UEI number. Those two things in particular are unfortunately brought forward from 2021 and will need to be updated in order to make it through that part of the project application. There is similar scoring to the years prior. So we're using a renewal project scorecard that focuses pretty heavily on homeless management information system data, or HMIS data, as well as system performance measures. This year, HUD has required that COCs in this process award more points or evaluate projects to the extent to which they contribute positively to system performance. So we've always asked questions about system performance of renewal projects. This year, those projects are a much higher percentage of a project's total available score. So when you're talking about system performance, we're talking about things like housing placement rates, or how long does someone experience homelessness before they're placed into permanent housing, income growth for folks in the project, how many folks are accessing earned income, how many folks are accessing unearned income as a percentage of the total number of people served, how many people are returning to homelessness. So if you exit someone from your project, are they returning to homelessness within 2 years? And then there's some interim look back periods of 6 months and 12 months. But we're really looking to see how successful are the successful exits, right? We also score applicants on the extent to which they exit folks successfully. So not looking at returns at this point, but just looking at, when people leave your services, where do they go? Do they go to their own permanent housing? Do they return to the emergency shelter? Do they return to the streets? And then we also look at housing retention rates of the folks in the program itself. So those criteria are weighted significantly higher than they have been in years past. And I think that isn't, again, in large part, HUD required that COCs evaluate projects to the extent that they contribute positively to system performance. But it was nice to see that we were already evaluating projects on something that HUD was prioritizing. We did this year add a scored criteria for those that are required to make single audit submissions to the Federal Audit Clearinghouse. So there is a requirement buried in the Code of Federal Regulations that the applicants that administer more than $750,000 in federal funding on an annual basis from any source, so a combined total of $750,000 or more, are required to carry out what HUD calls a single financial audit. And you can learn more about the single financial audit requirements in the Code of Federal Register 2 CFR 200. So what we're looking at specifically is, if you are required to make these single audit submissions to this Federal Audit Clearinghouse, are you carrying that out the way that it's supposed to be carried out? Are you doing that on time is basically what we're looking at this year. We're not looking at the contents of the single financial audit, although that could possibly be a future step for us as a COC. Right now, we're just looking to see, are you meeting the requirement of submitting your audits to the Federal Audit Clearinghouse in a timely manner. Scorecards are available in Excel format for each project type for the renewal project applicants. And applicants are not required to self-score, but they are encouraged to self-score. So we supplied those in an Excel format. I would like to note at this point that and we haven't sent anything out to the competition listserv, which will go out this afternoon, but we did update both the RFP for the renewal and the bonus RFPs. There was an error in the scoring materials for renewal projects that required us to update Appendix C of both documents. And so we did that this morning and reposted those application materials on the website, and we'll send something out to all interested parties a little bit later this afternoon after this webinar. But inside those materials, I think that Mary linked in the chat earlier, there are Excel workbooks for each project type that's eligible for renewal. So that is permanent supportive housing, rapid rehousing, those same projects when they're focused specifically on survivors of domestic violence, and then the joint component project, which is a combination of transitional housing and rapid rehousing. Any renewal project applicant that is subject to scoring in 2022 is able and encouraged to self-score using the Excel workbooks. We will begin running HMIS reports required to score projects this week. So we're not planning to score projects like today, although I do think that the RFP says that we would start today. We want to give folks a little bit more time to do whatever cleanup they need to do in HMIS before we start scoring project applicants. If you have questions about this process or about which reports to run, you can reach out to TXBOS COC, and we will do our best to help you navigate your questions. So that's about the annual process. Are there any questions about the annual process? I see some about, and is the emphasis still on serving the chronic homeless? And I think when we're talking about renewal projects, Jenny, the answer is you are pretty much locked into what you said you were going to do in your initial project application. So if your project was initially awarded with the intent to serve people experiencing chronic homelessness, then yes, HUD would expect that you are continuing to serve those experiencing chronic homelessness. But for new projects, that's a little bit of a different situation. So I can talk about that here in just a minute. But before I move on, are there any other questions about the renewal process itself? I recognize that it's a little different than it has been in the past. And I think primarily the difference is we're giving folks more time to submit their certification of consistency and eSNAPS project applications, and offering technical assistance on both of those components. So for the annual bonus RFP, this is a very different process than years prior. So similar to the renewal RFP, all of the scored materials must be due by August 31st. Those components of the application are listed in Appendix A of the RFP. But again, the certificate of consistency and the eSNAPS project application will not be due until September the 15th. If you have applied in the past, your application and apply will auto-populate with old information, which must be updated. So like I mentioned for renewal projects, that would apply to anyone that has applied in the past. You will need to make sure that your information and apply is current whenever you open up that application for the first time. This year, I think the major departure for new projects is that we're asking applicants to self-score their own application using the scoring materials in Appendix C of the bonus RFP for the CoC bonus projects and Appendix D for DV bonus projects. So these are Excel workbooks that must be completed in Excel. We will not accept completed scorecards in any other format other than Excel. Folks will complete the self-assessment in the Excel workbook. Those are a combination of narrative responses and multiple choice responses to a variety of questions that look at everything from agency capacity and administrative structure, the internal control environment at the organization, all the way to really project-specific questions. And specifically to the DV bonus, there's a great emphasis on survivor privacy and security considerations, as well as demonstrating your prior experience serving survivors of domestic violence or trafficking or sexual assault or trafficking. It's really funny. Mary pointed this, it's not funny, but Mary pointed something out to me earlier. I guess that I don't remember what day it was. All the days kind of run together at this point, but Mary pointed something out to me that HUD is updating the definition of who qualifies under Category 4 of the literal homeless definition, specifically for survivors of domestic violence. And I'm not going to try to parrot that off to applicants right in this moment, but that's available to you as part of the RFP and also in the NOFO. And that new definition goes live on October the 1st of 2022. It does not change things significantly for who would be eligible for these projects. If someone is fleeing domestic violence and they have no subsequent place to go, they have nowhere to go as they're fleeing, they in all likelihood would be eligible for the project. Now, that said, there are some special considerations with documenting eligibility for survivors that we're not going to get into in this space. But those workbooks look at all aspects of the project application for domestic violence bonus applicants. And now for CoC bonus, it's a little bit different. The way that we're operationalizing the expansion project application is basing it primarily off of the score of the renewal project that the CoC bonus applicant is hoping to expand. I'm going to pause there for a second, make sure that that makes sense to everybody. But basically, if you are a CoC bonus applicant and you have a high performing renewal project, it is likely but not guaranteed that you will similarly have a high performing expansion application. If you are a renewal project that is struggling with system performance measures or bed rate utilization or administrative capacity, it's not a guarantee that you will do well on the self-assessment for the DV, or excuse me, for the CoC bonus applications. So in any event, all applicants will self-score their own or self-assess their own performance or their own application, submit that to us in an Excel format. THN staff will review those self-assessments for all applicants immediately after they are submitted and upload a reconciled self-assessment to apply no later than September the 5th. Applicants will at that point have 24 hours from the time that they receive the email notifying them that their scores are available is sent and applied, so that you will get an automated message from Apply to let you know that your scores are available. You will need to go into Apply, review our reconciled score sheet, which would be based on your self-assessment. And then if we made an error in our reconciliation, we would obviously want to know about that. Or if you think that we scored you incorrectly for a particular metric, we would obviously want to know that as well. And then pending that reconciliation process, THN will adopt the final applicant scores for both the DV bonus and the CoC bonus on September the 6th. So all of the scorecards are available, or assessment tools as they were, are available in Excel format for each project type. So the CoC bonus self-assessment requires that you do have to score your renewal project application and import those scores into the application project, the expansion project assessment. That I will tell you that having looked at this stuff now for a solid month and a half, the names of the files all start to look very similar, and I know we're all super busy. So I would just caution folks to pay close attention to the file names and the zip folders that you download from the THN website. And again, any applicant may reach out to us to request technical assistance with a non-scored components of the project application. I cannot give you any specific guidance that would give you a competitive advantage over another applicant. However, because again, we're removing that part of the process from the competitive assessment, we can provide technical assistance on eSnaps, and eSnaps is really important. Again, the applicant profile is another part of the eSnaps project application, but that is required to be submitted to THN by August 31st, consistent with the RFP and with the Appendix A of the RFP. And the reason for that is we do need applicants to demonstrate some administrative capacity to navigate eSnaps on their own, and we think a really good demonstration of that is completion of the applicant profile, which is again detailed in the RFP and Appendix A. So I didn't really go into a whole lot of detail on what project application types are eligible under the annual bonus RFP. When HUD and when Congress fund the DV bonus, they're funding only specific types of project applications. So you can only request with the DV bonus, rapid rehousing. So that is a time-limited intervention up to 24 months of rental assistance with supportive services, ideally holistic case management that is focused on housing stability and income growth. So rapid rehousing is tenant-based rental assistance where participants find units in the community and in partnership, of course, with the applicant. There's some housing navigation that happens there and should be happening there. But it's really, the tenant has the agreement with the landlord for the monthly rent obligation. They are, the utilities are in their name. It's the most similar to, market rate housing that you're going to find in terms of subsidized housing. It's very similar to the housing choice voucher program from PHA world or public housing authorities. But the key difference there is that it only lasts for 24 months. The other type of project that HUD will fund using DV bonus funds is the joint component transitional housing and rapid rehousing project. So that's a mouthful by itself, but what that project type is intended to do is combine two project types, in fact, transitional housing and rapid rehousing. Participants can participate for up to 24 months. And when folks are enrolled in the transitional housing, they are in units that are operated and leased by the recipient of the funds. So your organization would need to strike an arrangement with a landlord or a block of hotel rooms or something like that, and use those units for transitional housing. The housing must comply with all the requirements for transitional housing in this CFR 24 CFR 578, but you also have this opportunity to enroll people into rapid rehousing. The kicker here is that all of this is based on client choice. And so you should be able, and HUD would expect that applicants that are awarded joint, and we call it THRRH, and there's a lot more information on this in the RFP and on the frequently asked questions document on our website. But HUD would expect that if you're operating a joint component project or THRRH, you are able to offer the housing that people want when people want it. And more so though, they also have an expectation that people will want rapid rehousing more frequently than they will want transitional housing. And so there are some unit requirements that are associated with that. Specifically, if you are an applicant to a transitional housing and rapid rehousing project, you must offer twice the amount of rapid rehousing as transitional housing. So if you have 10 units of transitional housing in your project application, you will need 20 units of rapid rehousing to satisfy that criteria of HUD's. That's a little bit, it's not super well communicated, but I can point you to where it says it, and that is definitely a priority for the CoC, is making sure that these applications are viable for the long term. In addition to that, there is an expectation that this is not an opportunity to fund transitional housing. If you request a joint component transitional housing and rapid rehousing project, we would expect that both project components are operational by the end of the first year. And so if you get to the end of the first year and you say, oh, hey, it turns out that everyone really only wants transitional housing and nobody wants rapid rehousing, that is that's okay, I suppose, in that instance, but we are obligated to score based on HUD's criteria. And so we will have to score them based on both components, which would in turn result in a lower score than if you were operating one. And the same would apply for rapid, right? Like you can't do one or the other, it's both. And I think that's why HUD created the program. And I was reading something on some HUD material recently, and trying to conceptualize this project type is challenging. But I think if you go into it with the understanding that HUD's priority is moving people to permanent housing as quickly as possible. So from their perspective, the transitional housing exists to make that connection to permanent housing. It should not be, like someone has to go through transitional housing before they can access rapid rehousing, or someone only, everyone only accesses transitional housing. It really should be an effort to move folks out of harm's way if they're a survivor of domestic violence, and into a safe environment, and then on to permanent housing. Again, centered in client choice. So I see some stuff in the chat about Mary's putting some information in there for the policy priorities of the NOFO. So I see a question from Dale Ferris for the DV funds. What is the maximum request allowed? That's a great question, Dale. There is no maximum request for the DV bonus funds. That said, we only have access to about 4.2 million, I believe, 4.2 million. And so we'll be limited by the amount that HUD has made available. Historically, that's been more than a handful of projects, right? You can look at the renewal inventory to kind of get an idea about the variation from project to project. But in rural areas, $1 million project is a pretty large endeavor. So that's just something to keep in mind. Yep, that's a great question, Dale. So I think you're keying up on a component of the RFP that allows the CoC to rank 2 DV requests for HUD consideration. And it should say may only, not to say that we will only, but yes, that is a provision of the RFP. And part of that is due to the intensity of the timelines associated with this process and wanting to be able to submit quality applications. So there's one thing that's not on this must know document now that I'm thinking about it, probably should be, is what happens after the project application. So any applicant that is going to be included in the CoC's priority listing must minimally score 70% of the available points for that funding type. So for the DV bonus, and I'm not going to try to recall it off the top of my head, there is, I believe, 250 points available. I could be wrong about that. It may be 260. An applicant would need to score 70% of the total amount of points available for a DV bonus project to be included in the priority listing. And then once we've identified who meets that threshold, we will provide them technical assistance to complete the remainder of the application, and then provide additional information about the entity for the CoC application. HUD asks a tremendous amount of information about who we're recommending for DV bonus funding. Things to include like your experience operating childcare, your experience with education, your experience with safety and confidentiality, and we're talking about like massive narratives, like 5,000 word narratives. So we want to make sure that folks that we're submitting are going to pass the muster when HUD goes to review our applications. So the required match, 25% of the federal request or 25% of the total project cost? These are great questions, Dale. 25% of the federal request. So for example, if you requested if you requested $100,000 in, excuse me, my brain just stopped working on me, y'all. If you requested $100,000 in total from HUD, there would be a 25% required match. So Molly said, my internet went out. I missed the answer to the question about the 2 DV programs moving forward. And so I think, Molly, the intent of that provision of the RFP is, one, we want to fill up the DV bonus, right? And we're going to have to do that with folks that meet that minimum 70% scoring threshold. But if that's 2, it's 2. If it's more than 2, we definitely can evaluate that on an as needed basis, if that makes sense. So Dale asks, HUD is providing 4.2 million for DV projects throughout the entire country. No, sir, or no, Dale, that's not accurate. It is 4.2 million for the CoC specifically, for our CoC specifically. Nationally, Molly Thibodeau might actually know better than me. I want to say it's $52 million nationally, but each CoC is limited in the amount of that total that they can access by formula. So our formula amount is 4.2. Robert asks, is the 25% match cash or in kind? That's a great question, Robert. It can be any combination of cash or in kind. There's more information in the RFP about how to provide reasonable assurance that you'll be able to meet the match requirements. Specifically, you have to, you're going to have to identify to us what you're proposing to use as match, and then why you believe that it's eligible. But yes, you can do cash or in kind. I think historically, cash match has been significantly easier for applicants, although we know that match is an issue everywhere. So when you are thinking about things like in-kind match, there are specific requirements for in-kind match that have to be met if the project goes to award. Typically, they require a lot more documentation on the back end. For example, if you are matching with in-kind food donations, right? Like, let's say you have a relationship with your food pantry and you get meal kits or you get food boxes from your food pantry every week, and then your case managers deliver them to people that are enrolled into the housing project. One, that's amazing. I hope that you do that, but the documentation that would be required to use those specific donations as in-kind match is significant. And so I typically will try to encourage folks to think about, if you're going to think about in-kind match, think about in-kind match that's really going to be worth your administrative time to document. So in-kind match for healthcare services is something that you can consider. In-kind match for rental assistance from another housing administrator is something that you can consider for in-kind match. If you're getting a deal at an apartment complex where you get units there for less than market rate, you could use the difference between what the tenant's being charged for rent and the market rate for that unit. There's a lot of different ways that you can do in-kind match that require little documentation in comparison to other ways. Basically, you want to look at getting the per unit cost as high as you can, so it reduces the number of lines that you're going to have to track for those in-kind donations. But bottom line is, in-kind is eligible on the same basis as cash. HUD will never tell you that you can do one or the other. My experience has been that when you're matching salaries from another budget, it's just a lot easier to document than when you're trying to document in-kind goods and services. And a question that went to the host directly, so not everyone saw this, was, if an agency applied for rapid rehousing through ESG TDHCA, are they also able to apply for CoC Annual Bonus Funds also for rapid? So that's a great question. So yes, you would be, if you applied for TDHCA, that's great. If you are awarded those activities by TDHCA, It will have to be distinct from the activities that you're proposing under the CoC application. So I wouldn't propose the same activities in both places and see which one sticks, because if you get selected in both places, then you're going to have double the work so you just need to go into it with, with that understanding that, like, if you're selected for TDHCA, you're going to have to perform for them. And if you're selected for HUD, you're going to have to perform for them. Does that make sense to whoever asked that question? Okay, cool. Dale is asking what exactly will be required by HUD in the stage 2 part of the process. So this entire process is a local process at this point, right? So what we're looking for after August 31st is folks to submit their eSNAPS project application and their certification of consistency by September the 15th. Technical assistance is available in that part of the process. The reason for this seemingly arbitrary deadline of the 15th is because we're going to have to identify who we're going to recommend to HUD no later than the 15th. So while y'all are still working on project applications and eSNAPs and certifications of consistency, we will have already evaluated the merit, if you will, of the project application and prepared a recommendation for the CoC board prepared a scenario for the CoC board to approve as the recommendation to HUD. The danger occurs that if we recommend an application that is still under complete, is still in the works, and then the 15th rolls around and that project application is not done, one, we are required to notify applicants whether or not they'll be included no later than the 15th. So applications that are not completed by the 15th create some issues for the CoC, right? That's not to say that there won't be any activity after the 15th, right? Like, folks will submit all of their materials on or before the 15th. We'll review them. If there are minor corrections that need to happen, we will, go back and forth about those minor corrections. But ultimately, what we're looking for with the stage 2 part of the process is a completed application that is congruent with what you proposed and apply and matches what the CoC board has approved. Does that make sense, Dale? Probably not. I'm feeling I'm not explaining that super well. Basically, there's 2 parts to the process. One, all the scored materials would be considered quote unquote stage 1. That's all due on August 31st. The rest of the non-competitive materials that are required to be submitted to HUD are stage 2, and those are due on September 15th. 100%, I will tell you that I've been doing this for a while, and I know Mary has too. This is the most complicated and needlessly complicated, hopelessly complicated even, funding cycle that I've ever had anything to do with. And so it is, it's like level 10. The hope, though, Dale, is that we are able to provide technical assistance to folks in this process, and for people that have not dealt with HUD in this capacity before, that there is some support that might make it a little bit easier to see an application all the way through to completion. I mean, our goal, as always, is to fill up the DV bonus and the CoC bonus opportunities. I just want to be really clear in this space today that does not mean that everyone that we recommend will get funded by HUD. That's a really common misconception, right? Like, we're gonna put our best forward, but HUD might select one of those or some of those or none of those. And so that discretion ultimately lies with HUD and is dependent largely on, again, the performance of the CoCs. About half of the project applicants score when it gets to TDA, or excuse me, when it gets to HUD. And so it's, again, really, really important that we work collaboratively. So in that spirit, one of the things that we're going to do this year that's a little bit different than we've done in years past, that's unrelated to the competitive process, but is related to the CoC application, is hosting a feedback session. There will be a feedback session that's not formally been set up yet for September the 14th, where folks can give us feedback on different things that they're doing in their community in response to specific questions that HUD has for CoCs, and the hopes that that will strengthen our project application. You know, it's really hard to stay on top of what's happening in 215 counties in any meaningful way. And so hearing from y'all about what's happening, what's working well, what's not working so great, here's what we're doing. You know, one, it'll serve the purpose of like getting us more robust answers to our CoC application questions. But two, it could also serve a really cool peer sharing space where folks hear ideas that maybe they haven't tried in their community that they would like to try. So I recognize that there was a couple more slides left. I apologize, y'all. All of the links that you would need to know, presumably, for the application are covered here in items 1 and 2 of this slide 14. So the competition homepage, the apply homepage, the frequently asked questions documents, all of the NOFO resources. And speaking of overly complicated process, the NOFO is available in no fewer than 3 places. That is grants.gov, HUD.gov, and the HUD Exchange. And the best I can tell, like, this is not HUD did not tell me this, but the best I can tell, this is how they're using each one of those different places. So like if there's an update to their notice of funding opportunity, it will go live on grants.gov, but not necessarily on the HUD.gov or HUD Exchange website. They seem to use HUD.gov for technical assistance materials, such as, you know, there's all kinds of stuff on HUD.gov that I can't think of off the top of my head right now. And then communication goes through the HUD Exchange. You know, that changed sometime in 2020. I think the lawyers had gotten a hold of it or something and were not happy about how HUD was communicating information about these opportunities. And so they responded by spreading it out all over the place. So there's some NAEH resources about what's new in 2022 for the CoC application. So less relevant to individual project applicants, more relevant to you know, folks interested in how the system is working and how the system is going to work together or should work together. And then specifically DB bonus resources, meeting the housing needs of survivors, which I believe is by Debbie Fox and the folks over at NASH. And then the National Network to End Domestic Violence did a webinar in 2021 about what DB and SB programs or sexual violence programs need to know for the CoC competition. A lot of that content is actually applicable to 2022, right? I watched it again over the weekend and I thought it was really helpful, so I thought I'd link it here. If you have questions about any of these materials, you are welcome to reach out to THN staff, specifically txboscoc@thn.org. If you're not signed up for our competition mailing list, you can do that at every action. The link there will take you to the sign up page. And I think that's all the actual content that I had. I'm not sure if folks have outstanding questions. You know, I don't know if folks have had the opportunity to read the NOFO or the RFP at this point. But if, again, I would reiterate, if you have questions, please reach out to us. You're not in this alone, and we want to help. So I'll just kind of stop talking for a minute, see if there's any questions. But other than that, I don't have any content to communicate. Mary, is there anything that you feel like maybe I missed, or you would want to just reiterate?
Yeah, just repeating what you said several times. This is a very complicated process that was already complicated, and HUD adds more details every year. So it's super important to read HUD materials, to read our request for proposals and applications. And yes, there is a lot to read, but if you have questions, please reach out to us, because that's often the quickest way that we can give you the answer as we understand it, or point you to a specific resource that could give you the answer. So, and we hope a lot of you are able to apply.
Thanks, Mary. Yeah, Paul, no, thank you for your support. It is a lot. I will say that, 2021, if we had an applicant that had not received CoC program funding before funded. So I know that it's possible. I don't want folks that are new to this to get discouraged. There are some pretty significant and imposing requirements, such as your SAM registration and that sort of thing. But it's definitely not impossible. And I know I would just encourage folks, if your primary role is to serve survivors, like we want to help you access these funds. Thank you, Molly. Thanks, Edgar. I'll hang out here for a few minutes in case there's any questions, but if you don't feel like you have any questions, you're free to go.
Well, great to see so many people on the call who might be applying for the first time.
Yeah, it's a lot of work. But we're in it together. Yeah, no, Robert, 100%. I mean, I have been doing this now for several years, and I did not think that they were going to do this to us. Like, I literally was living under the delusion that they had concern for my mental health, for our mental health rather. And no, they imposed the strictest timeline. And then to make it more complicated than what we've talked about today, there's a whole separate funding competition happening at the same time, right? So one of the things that we're asking folks is to like pick one and like give that one everything that you've got. Let us worry about all of them. You worry about one and give that everything you've got. And I think if we can all focus, we'll get there. But yeah, I mean, a 60-day timeline. I was floored when that NOFO came out, and my heart just started racing, because it's a lot for y'all, and it's not what ends up happening is quality all around is sacrificed, right, when we're on these kinds of time crunches and deadlines. And so we're just going to give it the best we can, and that's all we can do. But yeah, I started sweating, my heart started beating. It was really unpleasant, actually. I feel like I might be traumatized. Yeah, so check that. Let me put the link here in the chat. But if you go to the CoC, hold on, let me put the direct link. But it's where the RFP is posted. It will be posted there with the RFP and application materials. You can also make sure, Paul, if you're not already signed up on the newsletter or the competition listserv, which is this every action link on slide 15, that the notification will also go out to that listserv whenever the link is ready. Yep. All right. Well, if there are no other questions. Yep. Well, someone should tell HUD that. Robert said, I've taught grant writing at several community colleges, and always tell them, if you do not have the time to put in a good quality application, don't do it. I mean, I was just floored that they gave us the deadline that they did. Yeah, Virginia, I don't know a whole lot about what's happening in the Amarillo CoC, but I would definitely recommend reaching out to Jason as much and as often as possible. I feel for y'all. I think we're all the CoCs are struggling right now. But thank you. All right. Well, if there are no other questions, we'll go ahead and shut it down. Thank you all so much for attending and asking great questions. And as I mentioned, if there are more that come up for you, please feel free to reach out as often as necessary. Thanks, y'all.